Welcome to another episode of Facts. I'm your host, Stephen Boyce, joined by my co-host and icon of St. Michael, one of my favorites, made by Orthodox, blessed by Catholics. You can't get any better than that, folks. So it's good to have everybody. We're going to have a discussion about, you guessed it, Gavin Ortlund and the history of icons. We're going to respond to a clip, not the whole thing, but sections of a clip that goes on to really Gavin's foundation. One of the things that continually comes up when you're talking to Gavin, especially about a subject like this, he's done multiple videos now, two specifically for the whole entire subject. And then in other cases, he has responded to it on the side or in debate. And one of the things that I continually noticed about his historical practices is that he is constantly looking at history the wrong way. And he starts at the wrong places. And his conclusions become fallacious in many of those cases. And there's a lot of Catholic apologists and Eastern Orthodox apologists who have come out and responded to him recently. Many of us have been really trying to be a friend about it and being nice and showing him the errors of his ways, but he's really dug in deeper, and he has actually made a stronger push in some cases against these positions, even though people have tried to correct really the history in which he is using. And one of those people is a good friend of mine who we've spent a couple of episodes. I think it's our second episode together. We talk often. Looking forward to having him on in just a second. You may know him from the Catholic Brothers, so I'm going to bring him on stage. Steven. Steven, good to have you back. Last time we talked, I was in Anglican, and we were talking about the status of whether or not full communion would happen with the Anglicans and Rome. And it just so happens that happened, but it was just really one Anglican that did it. So congratulations on winning that discussion. And it's good to see you back, my friend.
Steven, great to be here, man. Yeah, that's funny. Previous circumstances were much different, but good to be on under these circumstances too.
Yeah. Listen, it's been nice to be on this side of the Tiber. I'd be lying if I said it was easier. It's actually quite difficult. And I always had a view of icons, even as a Anglo-Catholic, because they accept iconography. Most of them will accept the 7 ecumenical councils, except for on certain points, I think, which is odd. But iconography, I remember going to an Anglo-Catholic parish for the first time when I was in the APA. And we walked in the back of sanctuary there. We looked on the side, and there's like icons everywhere. I was like, well, this is new. This is not Protestant Anglicanism right here. And so there was definitely a high view of iconography in the Anglo-Catholic world. So I was already integrated into that. I wasn't comfortable at the time. And it really forced me to study it more while I was in the process of converting to the Roman Catholic Church. And then I became friends with Eastern Orthodox, and it was over after that. So, so this is good stuff. You did a video on this, and I'm going to have that link in the description if you want to watch Steven and his brother talking about this very subject. He also was on another channel recently with a friend of mine, Swan Sona, and you talked about the same subject, but I want to take a little bit of a different angle than what you did in that video, but kind of talk about what led you to respond. You and your brother both responded to Gavin, and what led to that the whole entire time.
Sure. So, so I was actually driving to work. I was going up to Minneapolis, and so I had an early drive, and it was like maybe 4 a.m. And while I was driving up, his video just popped into my feed, and I did not even know who Gavin was. So it was brand new to me. But I just saw that it had, quite a few views, but it wasn't like astronomical, where it was like, well, what's the point of responding with like, our podcast is small, or, so, but I listened to it, and as I was listening, I was like, first of all, I will say, I appreciated what Gavin's project was, because I could see that he was some sort of, at the time I was thinking some kind of evangelical-ish type of pastor or something, right? But you could tell that he was at least trying to make a historical case. It wasn't just like biblical proof texting, like the Exodus prohibitions or something lowbrow like that, right? So he was actually engaging in the texts. And I thought that his argument was sound. So I don't think his argument was way off base necessarily, but it was the way that the sources were being presented was way too simple.
Yeah.
And definitely moving in only one direction, when really the development of theology just doesn't work that way. It's always you can find different sources for what you need when you're looking in the era of a theological controversy, right? Because there's gonna be multiple angles at which people are coming. And there was just a lack of appreciation for the historical context of certain texts. And so in a way it became like, okay, I think he's kind of proof texting. He's using like the method of kind of lowbrow apologetic biblical proof texting and applying it to the fathers in a way, right? And so I actually was like writing down like response stuff as I don't recommend that to anybody driving. But, I was writing it down, and then I called my brother once the sun came up, and I was like, hey man, I mean, this is a video that I think actually we could respond to, not necessarily get into like the tit for tat stuff, but just to really like respond to these arguments. Because I knew that if you're a Protestant listening to it, you'd find what he was saying very convincing, especially if you have no real experience in the early church or early fathers or historical theology or any of those things. So we decided to do that. We responded, I think, with like a 2-hour video, going point by point, every text that he used, but also presented a kind of alternative thesis for interpreting all these texts, from the perspective of historical theologians, which is what we are. I'm not an apologist. I'm not even really a theologian. I mean, it's really what I'm trained in is historical theology. So trained first as a historian, and then taking the historical method and applying it to theology. So studying change in continuity over time when it comes to theology. So that's my specialty. So yeah, we came in from that angle.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing, because I think people that are historians, or they take a historical approach. I know that, having James Gilbert on here is Orthodox, and he's finishing his PhD in archaeology, and he takes a different angle from this than maybe say a historian, although they're sometimes side by side in the way they look at things. And I think a lot of people are getting frustrated with Gavin. And I kind of hate that, because he's a good guy at the end of the day. I mean, I've had him on, we've talked, I've actually moderated a debate with him and a friend of mine. He's not a bad person, but there's a certain point where the amount of cherry picking that goes on in history should be a concern to people. And this is what's happening, Steven. There's people that have been listening to him for a long time. They'll come to smaller channels like yours and mine, or they'll listen to somebody or listen to an interview on Swan's channel, or they'll read Eric Ibarra or somebody like that. And then they'll hear one single well-documented argument that deconstructs everything that builds the framework for Gavin. And next thing you know, I'm getting piled with numerous emails from Protestants or people that have had a strong opinion about this, who have all of a sudden started asking questions instead of making statements. And I think what's happening is there's a crack in the armor here. And that's because Protestants are notorious for doing this. And I can say that because I was that person.
Right.
I was
Same.
that person for a long time. And that is, we love to cherry pick Augustine when we want Augustine. It's like, we want this part of Augustine, but who cares what he said over here? We have the liberty to pick and choose what we want. We're Baptists. We do what we want, I always said that the Baptists are kind of like the buffet line people of history. They just pick what they want and leave what they don't want. And then they move on to the next section and do the same thing. And they build some sort of working theology and history from it. And I'm not saying that's true of every Baptist, but it certainly was true of me. And it seems to be true of a lot of the way that the church fathers get treated with such disregard for where they were coming from, because they had core essential beliefs behind everything they said. So if they say something on the side here that seems to be in favor of a Protestant idea, they're willing to reject their foundational beliefs that led to even letting them say a statement like that, while ignoring the other statements that are built off of that. They'll just take that one little isolated comment by leaving out their fundamental belief of all things church or Rome or whatever the subject is. They'll ignore the foundation of that person, that church father's belief system, and say, see, that's sola scriptura right there. Oh, look at that. That's non-iconography ideas. And then they'll sit there and make an assertion off of that by ignoring the whole entire premise of the foundation by which that church father stands in and believes in. Are you seeing that same pattern here a lot of times when these things are handled?
Yes. I think the Protestant problem overall can be boiled down to a few things, which we'll get into. But because I actually think that you can come at not just Gavin. Gavin is sort of just kind of like the symbol, right? But really, what Gavin is doing is emblematic of what most Protestantism does. And what it tends to do is it tends to extract texts from their contexts, and then by doing so, then they sort of treat it on its own. And so it's sort of like a Nuda text, so they do it with scripture, of course, but that's what they're also doing with the fathers, is they're taking, say, the writings of Augustine, and using his writings to argue for things that would completely violate his own, say, even his liturgical principles, right? Like, so they might even quote something he said about the Eucharist or something, but that wouldn't change the fact that Augustine is celebrating the Eucharist as a sacrifice on an altar, right? In a church, so there's just things like that where they'll just take the text, just lift it right out of history, play around with it, grab what what kind of sounds good to them and seems to reflect their theology, and then regurgitate that out into an argument, but not taking into account, like, well, yes, but who was St. Augustine and what kind of a Christian was he? So yeah. And I mean, and I don't know if you want to get into it now or in a few minutes, but I also, on Swan's channel, I kind of stepped back from, I didn't want to miss the forest for the trees, right? So I stepped back and really just looked at the forest and said, well, look, this is the fundamental problem with Gavin's argumentative methodology. And I can lay that out, briefly here too, just to kind of set the stage. But yeah, I in a short word, yes, I do see the same thing.
So what I might do this. There's so many angles we can take at this. We're going to play the clips, and I'm not going to play the whole thing. Just his statements about timeline, the idea of veneration, and what I want to do for a lot of people, especially on this channel, is there's a lot of category errors, and a lot of people don't understand the arguments. Anything that looks, sounds, or could be perceived as an idol is automatically, for the case of anything that is safe, we'll call it an idol. If it looks like idolatry, it's idolatry. If it smells like idolatry, it's idolatry. So, statues, images, kissing, bowing, all of those things are considered idolatry to people who are unfamiliar with Eastern practices. A lot of us in the West have adopted a totally different technique. So I think what I'm going to do, Steven, is I'm actually going to pull up some slides, and let's interact with the slides, because I actually want to help the audience understand that even if you're sola scriptura and you're listening, you can sola scriptura iconography here. And I'm going to show you from scripture where posturing like genuflecting, prostration, kissing, bowing towards not God invisible was permitted and practiced all through the Bible. And if you, sola scriptura people, are able to concede even one of these examples, I think that you're going to have to at least begin the process of rethinking in your mind what it means. So let's get some definitions down, because this is what Nicaea II was actually getting at. I'm actually going to pull up my screen here, Steven, and we can go through this together. And I want you to comment mostly on these two things: the difference between latreia, worship, and proskunesis is veneration in Greek, because this was really the big fight. What is the difference? When we say worship or veneration, worship is, what is it? It's true, it's proper. Who receives it? Scripturally teaching, God alone. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. How is it expressed? Sacrifice, adoration, offering of self, liturgical worship. We see examples of this both in scripture and history. Whereas veneration is honor and reverence and respect. Who receives it? We see in history saints, relics, icons. How's it expressed? Bowing, kissing, incense, lamps, etc. Now, I want you to take a moment, Stephen, and I want you to comment on why these distinctions, and there's much more that could be said here, so fill in any gaps you see. Why it is important to make the distinction between worship and veneration. That's what this is all about. This is really what it comes down to. Fundamentally, this is what it comes down to.
Why make the distinction? So, well, because it's logical. At the end of the day, it's in accordance with our nature. We do it all the time. Protestants do it all the time. Every time that you have a basketball game starting, I'm in Indiana, right? So it's basketball for me, but anytime you have the beginning of a basketball game, you have the national anthem and people stand up, put their hand on their hearts, right? You're venerating something, right? You're showing honor, you're paying respect. So it's not as pervasive in our culture because we largely live in a post-Enlightenment, iconoclastic culture. But in the ancient worlds, paying outward respect to, you can't really even say like national symbols because the national and the religious were not separated or distinct at all. Anything national was religious. Anything religious was national. And civic, I should say civic. So yeah, it was important not only for Christians, by the way, but even for pagans. Like they made these distinctions. And I know there was actually a time in one of Gavin's videos where he said that this whole thing about the difference between latria and proskynesis, that it's a later like made up thing. That is categorically false. Saint Augustine even talks about this. I can probably find the source for you because I think it's in the paper that I wrote. It's in one of the footnotes. But Augustine himself talks about the kind of honor that they pay to the martyrs into their bones, and he uses the word proskynesis and literally says this is not the latria that we offer to God, right? So these distinctions were important so that they could clarify. Again, all religions could clarify what their praxis was, and Christianity was no different in that regard. And neither was Judaism, even though Judaism wasn't using exactly these terms. They still would make these distinctions. So I think it's natural, but it's also historical. It's there across the ancient world.
So why do you think they get conflated? Where is this coming from? At the end of the day, is it civilization? Is it the side of the globe we landed on? Why do you think that? Why is it that when somebody, and I did this, I mean, I remember the first time seeing something like this. There was a guy at a Catholic church, and Claire and I and the kids were at the beach, and we were somewhat tampering into Catholicism a little bit. We were trying to get out of our comfort zone, and there's a guy outside the church, statue of Mary, holding his rosary and praying the rosary. And the first thing that hits me, Stephen, was this guy's an idolater. Like what in the world are we doing? Like, how is this? And I really struggle with that. And I look back at that moment and go, but it also challenged me to think differently too. Is it maybe it's me that's wrong? Like maybe I'm thinking about this wrong. But why is it that when we see something like that, a guy holding a rosary, looking at a statue of Mary or anybody for that matter, we instantly go, it's idolatry. Right there. Yeah. That's idolatry. Why do we conflate these categories when it seems like other civilizations, including pagans, knew how to make distinctions?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I would say it goes back to the Reformation, of course. But not just I think it's the Reformation in the West. I think it's Islam in the East, because Islam refused to allow these distinctions, which again were ubiquitous. And everyone understood them in the ancient world. So I think, Protestantism was sort of our Islam moment in the West. And it's funny because, especially from an Anglican background, if anyone would be able to get in a time machine and go back and see when, say, a king or a queen of England would hold court, right? If they would see how the queen and the king were treated, it would be very easy to say, you're worshiping. Like, you're literally, that's just a man. Like, why are you worshiping him, right? Especially like Queen Elizabeth. It's like, were they worshiping the queen when they would bow before her or curtsy or any of these other practices? All of the rules too for even entering into the queen's presence. There was like a whole, there's a whole instruction, right, prior to even coming into the queen's presence, right? So I think actually it's a loss of monarchy that has permeated the Western mind, right? That all of that is like nonsense, right? So we've lost this kind of venerative culture in general. Like, no one would ever venerate the president of the United States the way that they did the Queen of England, for instance,
right.
or any of the royalty of the Western world and the Western empires. So I would say I would actually pinpoint it to the loss of monarchy, because our political system is inherently anti-venerative and iconoclastic to the core. So because we don't have even a secular venerative context, because that's what's going on, is that, like, you're looking at okay, if we're going to honor the emperor, which, by the way, like Peter says, to venerate the emperor. All right, like the word there is one of the words for venerate. So he's saying venerate the emperor. If there's this secular sphere in this civic sphere in which we venerate emperors, kings, queens, when you came into the church and you had images of the true king, right, and the true queen, it's like, all the more should we show at least, right, the same outward gestures of piety and respect towards Christ and towards Mary and the saints, because and the martyrs, because the idea also is that the martyrs had replaced many of the fallen angels, of God's holy and divine council that had fallen, and received the worship of the nations. One of the great promises is that the martyrs, the apostles, the prophets, right, that God has elevated them sort of take their place in God's council. So these people, who are alive, by the way, are reigning with Christ. This is currently the millennial reign of Christ, and these people are rulers. And so again, it's like, why would I pay respect towards the emperor and towards an emperor's image, which, by the way, that was also happening even in the Christian era. If an image of the emperor was set up in the forum or the town square, people would go by, and it was customary they would raise their hand towards it, right, as a sign of a gesture of respect and honor and veneration. So it'd be preposterous to go into church and not do the same to the image of Christ. And that was one of the problems that the iconoclasts themselves got themselves into, because they still would venerate images of the emperor.
Yeah. And see, this is an interesting point, because for an American that doesn't have the societal feel, the contra would actually work into our thought process here. Say tomorrow we all wake up and we find out that in the middle of the night, a bunch of people went in New York City and graffitied the entire Statue of Liberty. And we all wake up, we turn the news on, and there is Lady Liberty completely butchered and covered in different paint colors. Every American would wake up feeling attacked.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Because we wouldn't, even though we don't have the working ideas like you're talking about, like back in England or looking at the emperor or the Caesars, there's a part where that statue represents our collective freedom in this country. She's the Lady Liberty. So to attack that image, we would all personally feel attacked. So we do, whether we know it or not, Stephen, we do have some understanding of this. We may not be willing to go see Lady Liberty tomorrow and genuflect, but there are people, and there's pictures of this, where people have come across the Atlantic into New York from World War II or other points of history where people really, really struggled, and they made it to America, the land of the free, and they did fall on their face when they got to New York City, and they did even go up to as close as they could Lady Liberty and offer some sort of like thank you of some sort, because there was an understanding that she represented something more than just an image there. But I'm telling you, if all of us woke up tomorrow and if this happens, I didn't do it. If Lady Liberty was desecrated and people just started graffitiing her, every American would feel attacked in some way.
Well, you don't even have to make it a hypothetical, because some of the people get the most heated when American flag burnings happen as part of a protest, right?
Sure.
Are actually bleeding heart, like good old Southern boy Bible Belt evangelicals, right? And you're like, well, what are you mad about? It's literally just a piece of cloth. I mean, right?
Yeah, you're right. We do have that intuitive understanding, even if it's not a societal practice or norm in relation to other things. So what I want to do is I'm going to slide through a couple of these examples, and I'm going to do this for you that hold to sola scriptura or some form of it, and show you that before we even get to Gavin, that Steven and I do not hold some sort of new age idea or something that just came out in the 8th century in Nicaea II, that this kind of thinking was going on for a long time, and it's even in your Bible. So let's look at some biblical examples of veneration, right? How about prostration toward human authority without divine worship? Genesis 43:28. They said, "Your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive." And they bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. This is before their dad, okay? This is before human. This isn't before God. They bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. How about in Exodus 18:7? Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other of their welfare and went into the tent. 1 Kings 2:19. So Bathsheba went to King Solomon, and the king rose to meet her. This is his mother, and bowed down to her. He's the higher authority. And he bowed down to her. Then he sat on his throne and had a seat brought for the king's mother, and she sat on his right. These are 3 examples in the Old Testament where prostration happened toward human authorities, and there is no worship here. It's a veneration. And one of these examples is Moses, the prophet of God, to his father-in-law, who's not a Jew. And he bows down and kisses him. Stephen, what say you?
Okay, so I would just say that if at this point, right, if I was a Protestant looking at this, I would say yes, but these are living human beings and not, images made of, stone or wood or paint, right? And so I know we're going somewhere with that, but that would be my initial reaction. I would also just say at the outset, I think this is important about linguistic clarity. So it's nice, in some of these ancient languages when you have words to distinguish what you're doing. Whereas in English, we have this unfortunate thing that has taken place where we use the word worship to mean latria, when in traditionally the word worship, just so everybody knows, the word worship is a blanket term to describe both latria and proskynesis. Okay, so you'll find, I just want to let Protestants know, you'll find old Catholic prayer books written in Old English, right, in Elizabethan English, that say, "We worship you, Mary," for instance, okay? And I don't want them to get like scared and balk at that, because again, worship is this blanket term, and we actually do have some English words to distinguish this. We've been using one already, veneration. The other one that the Catholic Church uses is adoratio, okay? So adoration. So adoration would never be given to Mary, to the saints, to the martyrs, right? That would only be veneration. But both God and the saints and Mary are technically worshipped, because it comes from the word worthship, right? You're declaring that they are worthy of the thing that you're giving them, whether that be veneration for these folks over here and adoration reserved for God alone. So I would just say that. But what these verses do, though, is they show you how far we have come civically. that we do not have a civic culture of veneration, whereas the ancient Israelites absolutely did. The Second Temple Jews absolutely did. And by the way, a lot of modern Jews, like in the Middle East, like still do. Absolutely, Muslims do. Muslims, they're accustomed to kissing the hands of their fathers still, right? And this is the thing that this is what Protestants have to understand, is that you guys changed, right? The civic order, you changed that. The Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church has maintained that ancient culture in its tradition. So it's like when you step into a Catholic Church, you're stepping into a different society. And you have to recognize that you're an outsider coming from an iconoclastic, secularized society, and you're walking right back into a Roman society. Right?
Like a time it's like a time capsule. I mean,
yeah,
you just went back.
You truly are. And that's why the tradition of the church is so important, because it preserves everything, right? It preserves all the trappings through which you will better understand even the scriptures themselves. Because this doesn't sound crazy to me. We kiss our bishop's rings, right? And we're not worshiping the bishop. I mean, nobody thinks that, right? So this is all perfectly natural. It's perfectly preserved in the cultus of Catholicism, but it was demolished right after the Protestant Reformation, especially after the Enlightenment and so on and so forth, after the toppling of monarchy. And
Agreed. But you mentioned bishops, so we will say holy persons. How about in 1 Kings 18:7? As Obadiah was on the way, behold, Elijah met him, and Obadiah recognized him and fell on his face and said, "It is you, my Lord, Elijah." So he had no problem bowing and going all the way down, full prostration, before the prophet of God. 2 Kings 2:15, the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho saw him opposite. They said, "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha," and they came to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. 1 Samuel 28:14, he said to her, "What is his appearance?" And she said, "An old man is coming up, and he's wrapped in a robe." Now, by the way, this is the whole story of the witch and what happened and conjuring up on accident. And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed his face to the ground and paid homage. So these are three examples: Elijah, Elisha, and Samuel, where these are holy men of God, and it was not improper to, even though they're alive, we'll get to the non-alive in a minute. So when you're talking, these are living people, but they're holy people. And you just brought it up with the bishops. Is it improper for us to do that? Somebody might watch that. A Protestant might come in and see the kissing of a ring, or even in procession, Stephen, when the priest is going down in the procession in our parish, we bow as he goes. We bow to the cross ourselves, and then we bow to the priest who represents in that moment in persona Christi. And so somebody might watch that and go, "You people are idolaters. You're worshiping the priest," right? But let's sola scriptura this, back up. Sola scriptura teaches us that prostration towards holy persons is proper and worthy of honor, that God doesn't rebuke, especially with three major prophets like Elijah, Elisha, and Samuel.
It can also be towards unholy persons who occupy a holy office. So that's something I think that, Protestants can't get up with. Let's say you had a lot of Protestants who had a lot to say about Pope Francis, for instance, right? And we would still, right, respect as much as possible. Everyone would still, kiss his hand and all those things, even if you'd yank his hand away. Because again, you're also venerating the office itself. And this is why St. Paul, they slap him after he rebukes the high priest. And he says, and then Paul doesn't say, "Hey, how dare you? He's just a man." He says, "I am sorry. I actually did not know that was the high priest. Otherwise I wouldn't have spoke that way." So,
and he's not a good man.
Even though this is a wicked person, right? But he occupies a holy office, and Paul recognizes that. And again, it was culturally shameful for him to speak that way to the high priest, but
it's like you said. Ignorance. I mean, like you said, Peter even said we're supposed to honor the king, and the king was persecuting the church. I mean, at the end of the day, what are we doing? But again,
right. I actually, can I say something real quick too? So, later on, Christians, so Gavin, no doubt, would probably bring this up too, that like Christians were being murdered for not burning incense, to the emperor. And so he'd say, well, what's that about, right? Aren't they supposed to honor the king and venerate the king, right? The problem with that is that they weren't offering incense to the emperor. They were offering incense to his genius. The genius and genius, it's not like, a smart person or
smart guy.
Yeah, right. Genius is the spirit that guides the emperor, which was, part of the lares, right? And so they were actually asking them to burn incense to a god that guided the emperor. So that's why they didn't burn the incense and show any civic respect in that sense.
Yeah. And they used incense for other things, but not that, for sure.
Yeah.
And so, but that goes back to, they knew there was a line between adoration worship, if you would, in a situation like that, versus the line of we're honoring, we're venerating on this side of things.
That's right.
This is where the rubber meets the road. So the Protestants say, all right, you got us on that one. But I mean, again, these are living people. We see it, etc. What about towards sacred spaces or sacred objects? You do realize the Holy Scriptures, your sola scriptura approach, has to accept prostration before sacred spaces and sacred objects. Joshua 7:6, then Joshua tore his clothes, fell to the earth on his face before the ark of the Lord until the evening. He and the elders of Israel, and they put dust on their heads. So if it wasn't enough that they, bowed before the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of the Lord, they stayed there all evening. The whole entire elders of Israel did it with Joshua, and they put dust over their heads and remained in prostration the whole entire evening. Let's think about this. The Ark of the Covenant is beaten with gold and wood. It has images of cherubim angels too on it, which
invisible creatures.
Right. Thank you. Spirits. Did Joshua commit the idolatry that God warned against? No graven images. You shall have no other gods before me. Did Joshua and all the elders of Israel commit and break the commandments of God and idolatry by prostrating themselves all evening long with dust on their heads before, not the Lord? And if you say, well, the Ark of the Lord represents the presence of the Lord, thank you. You've settled the matter for all of us. So let just comment on that one first. We'll get to Numbers 21 in a second. Just comment on that act from Joshua and the elders.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a textbook example of venerating a holy object within the cultus of ancient Israel. Now, what's interesting about this is that when you're talking about the Solomonic Temple, and my brother and I have a video on this. It's called Jesus and the Secrets of the Temple. It'd be a good one for people to listen to because we talk about sort of the tension between the first and second temples. Because what happens is that after the Jews build the second temple, and then after Herod's renovations of it and all that, it was starkly different from Solomon's temple. Even the holy place was like on the same level as the sanctuary, right? In Solomon's temple, you had to go up. That's why when John, for instance, right, in Revelation, it says, and then I heard the Spirit said, come up here. He's not going up, shooting up into the clouds. It's talking about come into the temple, like up the stairs. And in the Holy of Holies, like if you look at the two holy, just Google images of Solomon's Holy of Holies versus the Second Temple Holy of Holies. The Second Temple's Holy of Holies has nothing in it. It's literally a rock. So something took place development-wise in Judean religion from the Israelite phase to the Jewish phase. Okay. And what's interesting about this is that you'd think that the Protestant could come and say, yes, see, so God was leading the Jews away from this, right? This materiality of religion and moving them to truer, something truer and truer. The problem with that is that Jesus predicts the destruction of that temple, right? And has pretty harsh words for it. And then in John's Revelation, when you're looking at all the symbology of the restored temple, it's not the second temple. It's Solomon's temple.
Yeah.
So you can tell that the Christians had this intuition, right, that the purest that the cult had been was in that original kind of Solomonic establishment phase. Not that Solomon was pure, right? Not that the Israelites were pure and that they were following God, and all this, but the architecture of the temple and the elements of the temple, right? That God is going to raise those things back up again. So God approves of this cult that we're reading about right here on the screen, right? This is God approved. And they, like you said, they're bowing down to something that is clearly the work of their hands. I think the only thing, if I was to steel man the Protestant argument,
it would be,
yes, Stephen, we hear you. That's very interesting. However, God actually commanded these particular things to be made for this purpose, but he never commanded, say, images of Jesus or Mary or the saints to be made. Okay. So that's something that you would then you run the argument you'd have to, contend with.
Yeah, of course. But then it leads to the logical conclusion, did God violate his own laws? Because commandments don't have exceptions of you shall not create any graven images except when I say so.
Mm-hmm. And Marcion would get up with that.
He probably would.
He'd have no problem, having issues with this cult.
So again, there's this idea where we don't actually see, even though God said, and my pushback on that would be, even though God said to build the Ark of the Covenant, there is no prescriptive instructions to bow before it.
Mm-hmm.
You could simply argue, well, God said to create it and build it and make it out of gold and wood and put the tablets of the law and all these things. Yeah, great. But at what point did God say you should bow or not bow? In fact, we have more reason to believe you shouldn't bow to it than we have reason and command to bow to it. So again, did Joshua and the children of Israel violate Exodus 20? Because there is no prescriptive plan in God's commandments to bow before only images he commands or any image at all. In fact, if you just take it at face value, any image on the surface that is bowed to is idolatry, including ones like this.
It just proves that there's nuance. There's nuance to the Exodus prohibitions, and the minute that you entertain that notion, now we're in a different playing field, right? So if the Exodus prohibitions are as wholesale, right, as Protestants would assert, then we have to contend with that. However, we don't have to contend with that because obviously with the rest of the witness of the Old Testament, there is nuance to the Exodus prohibitions. So that's like kind of step one. Let's lay the foundation here. Is there nuance to what God said when he said, you shall not bow down to graven images in the works of your hands and all these things? Are there exceptions to that? And the answer is quite clearly, yes, there are. So I would start there.
Yeah, 100%. And here's one that's, to me, hits really, really close to home on the argument of can it be used for or against? And the answer is yes. In Numbers 21:9, you have Moses made a bronze serpent. Again, God told him to do it. Set up on a pole. If the serpent bit anyone, he would look at the bronze serpent and live. So God told Moses to make a graven image. That's what he did. Told him to make it. Put it up really high. Everybody looks at it, gets saved. That's it. Now, we find out later in the days of Hezekiah that the people of Israel started worshiping many years later, started worshiping this. And Hezekiah had to destroy the bronze serpent that Moses built because people were committing idolatry with it. So the same object saved people's lives in Numbers and became the object of idolatry in Hezekiah's day to the point where he had to destroy the thing. What changed? What changed between the wilderness and Hezekiah? And then Jesus kind of redeems this whole thing in John 3, that he likens his own being lifted up on the cross so that when all men look to him, they'll be saved. He uses this image for salvation through himself. So he kind of restores the image of what it meant. But in between Jesus and the wilderness, there was an idolatrous moment for Israel where this thing had to be destroyed. So kind of, what are your thoughts on that? That the bronze serpent was a savior in one passage of the Old Testament and an object of idolatry. So there must be a difference between these lines, even with the same exact object.
Sure. Yeah. Well, a lot can be said there. And there's a lot of scholars who have said many things about it. Some things that probably wouldn't be considered orthodox. So I'll stay away from those, though I think they're interesting. Yeah. But you have to understand too that, we tend to think of ancient Israel as this like monolithic culture, right? That it's like the ancient Israelites were just like, we tend to conflate, right, Hebrews with Israelites with Jews. Those are three very distinct stages of this old covenant people. The Hebrews were a certain clan or a certain group of clans of people coming out of Egypt, right? All mixed, right? All different mixed peoples. And then the Israelites, once they established the kingdom of Israel, which is the phase that we're in with these texts, they're intermarrying with Gentiles all the time. Gentiles are just coming right in, baby. Like they're bringing with them their gods. You have mixed marriages where some are, Yahwists, right? And then you had someone who's still a pagan. And they just saw Yahweh as just one among other gods. Some would even say, yeah, he's the most high, right? But there's still these other gods that we need to pay homage to. So they would construct high places, right, to honor those gods as well. There were all kinds of shrines in Israel. There were all kinds of temples throughout Israel. Most people don't realize. The prophets were the great advocates of worshiping only one God, and worshiping specifically in Jerusalem, right? And not everybody got up with that. I mean, look at the Samaritans, right? The Samaritans like, no, it's over here on this mountain, right? So Israel is a very complicated place, and it's not as like monolithic as you think. It's absorbing a lot of different cultures through treaties, intermarriages, and all that sorts of things. So what was happening was that these people over time started to offer what is offered in the temple, right? Being offered to this thing, right? To this bronze serpent. And it just so happens that bronze serpent, the seraph, was a symbol that was identical to the serpent gods of other nations. So they recognized it as something other than what God erected it for, because the seraph for the Hebrews, right? That symbol was actually the throne guardian of God. So it was an angelic being. And originally, by the way, Satan was a fiery serpent. He's one of the throne guardians. That's what's happening, by the way, in the Genesis text.
Genesis 3.
It's telling you about the fall of the throne guardian of God and how when he falls, he brings us with him. Which is super interesting because when you look at the word that is used for the serpent in Genesis, it's depending on where you put those vowels, man, that word can mean three different things. They can mean snake, sure, but it also can be a reference to this seraph figure. So what's going on there is that this symbol had run its course, in other words, and it fulfilled its purpose, and it was no longer fulfilling its purpose, and so it was destroyed because Jesus is not just like using it as I wouldn't even say he's using it as a metaphor. He's saying he's replacing that serpent.
Yes,
that serpent should still be in the temple. 100% it should still be in the temple. He's that bronze serpent. And when he's lifted up, he will draw all men to himself, right? In the same way that serpent fulfilled its purpose in the old covenant cult. So in the new covenant cult, the serpent for us is the crucifix.
Ooh, man. Oh, man. There's, I have a lot of thoughts there.
Yeah. I mean, it's very profound.
Okay, I'm gonna you've been playing devil's advocate for the Protestants. My turn. So the crucifix, you're saying that what we see of that now in the crucifix is a representation of what was happening in Numbers. How do we know that we're not the violators of Hezekiah's day when we're doing our acts of worship and adoration and veneration and all those things in a single ceremony? How do we know that the Catholics are not the Hezekiah people? They're the Numbers people. How do you know that procession of that?
Sure, because the fiery serpent originally, like I said, stood for the throne guardian of God that was going to guard the Israelites from the fiery serpents that were going to be released in the camp. Okay, so it's like, honor this being that is going to relieve you, right, of these other fiery serpents, which, by the way, I think are demons. Now, when you look at what the image became to this, I guess, syncretized Israelite religion, which, by the way, they had the Asherah in the temple. They had all these different like figures of the gods like in the temple, right? Like later on at this time. So that fiery serpent no longer even represented to them what it had represented in the past. It came to represent the gods of the nations. So there was a transfer of symbology there. And that was not to be tolerated, because now that has become an image of something that is false. That's a false image, right? Whereas the crucifixion is an image of the Son of God. That's a true image. It actually, like, the Son of God is real, right? like he's not a demon, right? So, and the fathers talk about this, by the way, during the entire proceedings of the Council of Nicaea II, of what is a true image and a false image. The reason why the Christians were so against pagan idolatry was because the images that they were bowing down to, at best, were fake. They don't exist, right? They're false images. They're lying images. And there were Greek philosophers who understood this too, like philosophers who weren't, really up with the popular pagan religion, but were more like, towards this higher kind of, I wouldn't say monotheistic, but at least they understood that there was this highest good, right, from which everything else proceeded, the one and the many. But they themselves had said that, like, these are false. These are false. The things that are being depicted are false, right? And that's why you can't bow down to them. But the fathers, they had the same exact thing when they were castigating the pagans. They're saying, at best, it's not real, right? At worst, it's a demon that's co-opting the image to have you worship it, right? And so you're actually, I mean, dude, the entire phrase that sums up Roman religion was "do ut des," to the gods. It was I do so that you may do. It was a bargain. It was a covenant. It's like, we'll do this, or we'll build you this temple. We'll give you this statue. We'll breathe on the statue, right? So that it becomes a body for you. But if we do that, God, you're going to have to take care of us. You have to take care of our harvests. You have to make sure that we have peace, right, on our borders, and that if anyone comes to conquer us, we conquer them. Right? That's the bargain. Okay. So, the Christians were saying that what's happening there is that you're actually making covenants with demons. And this is what St. Paul is talking about. He says that he has freed the Gentiles, like Christ freed the Gentiles. He freed the Jews from slavery to the law, and he freed the Gentiles from slavery to idols. And idols, in his view, was the demonic powers that held sway over them. So Jesus broke the two's yokes, the two groups' slaveries, brought them into one, Jew or Gentile. Now it's a new man, right? A new body. Long-winded way of saying that the reason why then a crucifix is not an idol is because it's not a false image. It does not portray something that is false, much less something that is demonic. It portrays something that is true.
That is such a great way of putting it. I mean, that distinction is brilliant. In fact, it's going to lead. I'm actually going to pull up the screen again to this other section, because that goes with the Old Testament prohibitions of idols, because there was actually something going on in these ceremonies that exceeds just, they were sculpting a picture of something and leaving it there. Notice what Psalm 135 says. The idols of the nations are but silver and gold, the work of man's hands. They have mouths, but they do not speak. They have eyes, they do not see. They have ears, but they do not hear. Nor is there any breath at all in their mouths. Now, this goes back to something you just said a minute ago. Those who make them will be like them. Yes, everyone who trusts in them. You just described Psalm 135 a minute ago. There was this concept where in idol building, they would cut open the mouth of the idol so that it could have breath,
That's right.
so that it could be inhabited. I mean, Habakkuk 2:19, woe to him who says with a piece of wood, awake to a mute stone, arise, and that is your teacher. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all inside of it. The one thing that God created, he made us in his imago. We are the image of God. But what did he do when he created the image of God? He breathed into the man the breath of life, and he became a living soul. And so when we look at these idols, what we even see in the Old Testament is exactly what you were just talking about. Like, all right, we're going to make this image for you. We're going to breathe all these things that we're going to do. And they would cut a mouth open for these gods so that they could be inhabited. This is why when you mentioned this a second ago, when God rebuked his people and the psalmist, when he's talking about Molech and offering children to Molech, the psalmist says, you offered your children to demons. It didn't say to Molech, you've offered your children to demons. How about in Exodus, when God brought Passover night, he said, I'm going to judge this night the gods of Egypt. What was God going to judge a bunch of stones and wood? Or
No,
is it the
in fact,
entities, the powers?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, if you go back, I think, oh gosh, I'm rusty. I think it's Deuteronomy, I want to say 32, could be wrong, but it's basically when the gods of the nations are appointed, you know?
Yeah, it is Deuteronomy 32.
Okay. Yeah.
Or he distributed to the sons of God.
Yes. So the sons of God, right, are the ones who have fallen, because God originally had set up these angelic beings, one for every nation, to guide them back to God. That was their whole duty and their whole mission. Well, the nations built idols to them, and then those sons of God were tempted to receive that worship, and they did, and became these demonic powers. And you have to understand too that, well, not you, but I'm saying everyone listening, that there were many different bodies for the gods in pagan religiosity. So the gods could inhabit all kinds of things.
Yeah,
they could the gods could inhabit the kitchen. They could inhabit the hearth of the home, and they would be invited to do so. In fact, and temple prostitutes. Like temple prostitutes was not just like some pleasure business like it is today. Temple prostitutes were they would invite the god into themselves so that the king could procreate with them, right? Or vice versa, where the king would ask to be possessed by the god and become the body of the god, and then he would have sex with a temple prostitute, and then that child would be 1/3 deity, right? And this is why there's a distinction even when Jesus is going around and casting out demons. Not all demons are made alike, right? Some of them are called unclean spirits, and that's a different category. That's many scholars have said that's the spirits of the offspring of these unholy unions between the gods and men, right? Because they're unclean because they're mixed, right? Now, what you just said a minute ago, I think is interesting, and it's important because that's what the whole Garden of Eden scene is. We totally miss it if we go like young Earth creationism versus evolution. It's like, dude, you are missing the complete point of that text. Like, God is building a temple, like he's building a grove. And because the rivers are flowing out of Eden, that means it's a high place. The rivers are flowing downward, right? So it's a high place. It's a mountain. And God is establishing a grove, which is a temple, an outdoor temple. But in this instance, the humans are not making a body for the God so that the God will do the humans will. God is the one who said, who establishes an image, breathes into it, and says, "You're going to do my will." So that you have the whole relationship mixed up here, right? So Adam, when we say that Adam is the image of God, right? We know that later on theologically we say image and likeness, it means these different things, right? But to the ancient Israelites, most likely what they're saying is that he's the idol. Like he is the idol in the temple. Adam is the idol in the temple, the high priest, right? Which is why Jesus then becomes the high priest, and he is now the true idol of God. He's the icon of God.
The icon. I feel like that's in the New Testament somewhere. I read that somewhere.
Yeah, he's the image, the idol, right? The image of the imageless God, you know.
And it's an interesting point, because even the book of Jubilees, when it talks about the Garden of Eden, it speaks of it as a temple. Like this is the Jewish understanding. And so when we can actually look through the scriptures, especially the Old Testament, through the lens of an ancient Near Eastern mindset instead of our Western civilized mindsets, we can actually start understanding and appreciating not only some of these passages. Like for years, you see these prohibitions and these marks against these people who are built. You build these idols, but they don't have breath in them. I didn't know what that meant until I even started like studying it. It's like, what does the breath inside this idol have to? How's that a knock on these gods by saying there's no breath in these gods?
Right.
Well, in their mind there was, but God didn't see. It's a fake image. It's not real to him, because he's the one true and living God. These other gods are subject to him. And so
they smell like beef and cheese. They're not the real God. And the thing is too, that's why the importance of the Solomonic temple, because, and why God prescribes it to be built the way it is, because God is actually having humans create Eden again. So all the symbology of that Solomonic temple is all the stuff that was in Eden. That's why the lampstand, right? Like the lampstand is the tree. Right, the cherubim, right, are the cherubim that were guarding Eden, right? So there's all of this stuff, all this symbology, and also the veil itself, right? We learn later from Josephus that even the threads of that veil represented the primordial matter. It's, you know, earth, air, fire, water, right?
Yep.
And then that, like, though that fabric was woven into the high priest's outer garment. But when the priest would enter into the Holy of Holies, he would have to take that outer garment off, meaning he would have to shed off the material world to enter into the heavenly place. But then when he would come back, he would put it back on, because he passed through the veil. Now go to Hebrews and you understand what's going on. It says, we went through the veil, that is his flesh, right?
Changes the whole thing.
Yeah, and that's why the second temple had problems. It really had problems. Not only was it hijacked by a reprobate like Herod, like the Herodians, right? But more than that, it was missing all of the symbology of Eden, which is why in Revelation the Christians are restoring all of that imagery in the temple and showing you that now again, the bronze serpent, that's Christ, right? Like so there's all the ark, like, that's Christ. It's all going back, like the showbread. That's Christ. So you could see how everything is now being fulfilled, right? The continuation of the covenant.
Man, folks, as you're listening to this, I hope that you're pausing, and there's might be points in this discussion where you need to pause and go back and listen to it again and think through that. Like this is something for me personally took years to be able to even open my mind to think about. But once you actually start thinking about this through the lens that we just been talking about, all of a sudden your Old Testament theology class makes sense. All of a sudden these verses you memorized make sense. The commandments make sense. Hebrews make sense. The vision of John. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, why does he see this city and all these things, and then all of a sudden there's the river of life there, and you've got the tree of life on both sides coming out of this idea, which goes back to Ezekiel's image, and Ezekiel sees this same exact thing. It appears that even Ezekiel himself, he's not looking at this second temple per se. Of course, his timeline would be problematic, but the vision that he gives is of the first temple. I mean, a better temple. Ultimately, he sees Christ based on what John's telling us. All of a sudden the Bible becomes, Your sola scriptura will do so much better if you're at least willing to let these texts speak, and then they start building not just a historical argument. Because one of the things I wanted to do, and I thought about this, Stephen, is I didn't want to start with Nicaea II, although we started with the language that they were talking about. But I wanted to show our listeners, many of which are on a journey. They're on a path. You've been on it. I've been on it. You came full circle. I went the long way because my grandparents were all a part of the Catholic Church, especially in Italy for many, many years. And then now I've made it full circle to my great grandparents and beyond. But I look at these things, and I needed episodes like this to just create reaction and thought and going, man, that's in my Bible. I'm sola scriptura, and that's in my Bible. And I think these things are important. These discussions are important. So I encourage anybody in the audience that's going to listen to take your time with this. Don't rush through this. Read deeply, think deeply, start seeing these parallels, Old and New Testament, then go to Nicaea II's documents. This is something I don't think Gavin does fair enough. We don't talk about the history behind this. We just go to the document and say, well, there's an answer. That's it. You're screwed.
now you're getting to my main contention with Gavin, and honestly with most Protestant apologetics, because there's a few things that are really wonky with how Protestants interact with the Old and the Old Testament and how it relates to the New. And what we're talking about right now, I hope, has at least given them a little bit of a glimpse into why, like, if you walk into an Orthodox church or a Catholic church or something, like, the things that you're seeing and the practices that you're seeing are actually very benign, right? Yeah. It's actually very common, like, to the cultus as it has developed over the centuries, not just in Christianity, but starting all the way back, right? All the way back to when Moses and these ragtags got out of Egypt and established the tent of meeting. I mean, this is the piety of the people of God. And where they go wrong too is that I think most Protestant Christians do not have a very robust view of Second Temple Judaism and the development of what we would call Rabbinic Judaism. Those are two different things, okay? Not divorced from one another, but distinct enough to comment on. Because this is what gets us into, like, the whole dispensationalist thing today, and how God still has a covenant with the Jews, and then he has a covenant with the church and all this kind of stuff, right? Because Christianity, I don't want to say predates, but maybe just slightly predates what we would see as modern Judaism. Like, it predates Judaism. Okay. And the reason I'm saying that is because Second Temple Judaism is the foundation upon which Christianity goes one way and the rabbis go the other. All right. So rabbinical Judaism, like the Mishnah, for instance, right? Like the Mishnah is in the late 2nd century. Okay. So that document, I have it on my shelf, so I'm pointing back there. Sorry. But that collection of documents formed what we would call modern Judaism. Like, it formed Judaism as we know it. Okay. And it was formed in reaction against the Christian movement. So we developed against each other, in other words, right? And so what I would say to people is, Protestants especially, is like, they tend to think that, like, oh, you go see, like, Messianic Judaism, like, go watch the Messianic Jews. That's like, man, that's like authentic Christianity right there, right? Because the earliest Christians were Jews, and there they are doing their Torah thing, and it's Jesus. Wow. But it's like, I'm not fascinated by that, and I'll tell you why. Because that's rabbinical Judaism, which developed after the destruction of the temple, after the Bar Kokhba revolt, right? With Jesus sprinkled on it. So it's a form of Judaism that was formed in reaction against Christianity, and they sprinkled Jesus on top. Wow. I'm more impressed when I walk into an Orthodox or a Catholic church, because I see this is Second Temple Judaism developed with the Messiah, right? So that's why I'm saying that the cultus of the people of God and the piety of the people of God is very important, because you could very easily find yourself a Marcionite if you're not careful. Ooh. Because how are you going to be able to say that everything we just read right now, right, and more, there's tons more in the Old Testament. Oh, yeah. How are you going to be able to say that the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New are the same God? when they are worshipped so differently, like so differently. When you walk into a Baptist church, can you really say, number one, can you really say that this is a newer and a better covenant? Okay, I'll just leave that for people. But when you walk in, though, can you really say that, yes, like this is the same worship that God commanded, you know, of the people of old, right? The chosen people of old to worship him with? It's like something changed, like something radically changed in the general spirit and the ethos of the cult. But when you come to an Orthodox or Catholic church, it didn't. Like the cultus, the common praxis of the church is very similar in ways to the Lord, but it's very different because it's fulfilled. Like you can actually walk into a Catholic church and say, yes, this is the Second Temple Judaism. This is the Israelite religion. This is Hebraism fulfilled in the Messiah. That's why we're offering sacrifice. Like that's why we're offering incense. That's why we have priests. Like, you know, so yeah.
Yeah. But see, what we're trying to do, folks, is we're trying to start further back. We can't talk about the 8th century. We can't talk about Nicaea II if we don't have our terminology and our understanding right, because they're debating something on that side of history that we on this side of history are looking back on, and we're trying to put our principled ideas onto the 8th century church or the Ecumenical Council of Nicaea II. And that's not fair to anybody in that council. It's not fair to those bishops. It's not fair to what they were looking at. It's not fair to the terminology they're using. And this is my fear. And Steven, I mean, you've been saying it this whole time. We've projected today's thinking onto those men at that ecumenical council. And we're looking at it from this period. They're looking at it that way. Everything that we just been talking about. And until we establish, are we even having the same conversation? Because that's the question. Are we having the same conversation about Nicaea II that Nicaea II was having about themselves? And the answer is no. But look at the quote on the screen, because this comes from Price. Fathers of Nicaea II would have found this whole debate bizarre. Their concern was not to argue that the veneration of images went back to the beginning, rather end of the 7th century, but that it had supported the great fathers of the 4th and 5th centuries and went back through them to the apostles themselves. Because, I mean, let's be real. I mean, that's exactly what the Nicene fathers are saying, is that this did go back to the apostles themselves. And even Gavin admitted that. Like, the claim of Nicaea II is that this isn't some accretion. Like, this has been going on all along. Like, he says that earlier in the video. But he does say that the debate is whether this happened at the beginning or the end of this time period, which is insane to me.
No, yeah. I mean, I don't think that that's probably what he himself is saying, because he does reference other instances. I've seen him reference other texts that way predate that for icon veneration. But just to say that, like, we have a reference to icon veneration going all the way back to the 2nd century. In a Gnostic text, albeit, right? The Acts of John. However, what's interesting is that Gnostics would always use their texts, right? And look for the fools in the text, like the foolish Christians, because those are the Orthodox Christians that they're castigating, right? Yeah. And in the Acts of John, right, there's this guy named Lycomedes, and he commissions a portrait of the Apostle John, and he hangs it in his bedroom for veneration, which, by the way, is in the Lorarium, which is where Romans would have their household gods. Okay. Now you can see what the Gnostic is doing. The Gnostic writer is trying to make Lycomedes look like an idolater, right? But Lycomedes has an icon of John in his room, and he would set lamps before it, crown it with garlands, right? Show just normal venerative type of behavior towards it. And then he has John like rebuke this person for this, right? And so you're like, well, that sounds like there's some Christians that the Gnostic is opposing that have portraits commissioned of the apostles and are paying, benign acts of honor like towards those images. that's a 2nd century text, right? So,
and it makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense with a lot of the ideas because I mean, there's different forms of Gnostic groups, of course, but Docetism was very dominant in the 2nd century, and this is the point of the incarnation. We believe iconography is viable because of the incarnation. They do not believe in that key factor, so they're naturally going to reject anything that's physical, anything that is of the physical and the spiritual, that it's blended and that they're working together and that there's some harmony going on here, is an absolute rejected idea. They reject God becoming in the flesh, for goodness sakes. So naturally, they're going to, do this number on any kind of idea of iconography.
So, first, Gavin's whole method, and I talked about this on Swan's channel, so if people want to get into detail on it, they can go and watch that episode, but I'll just quickly summarize it here. But every single community in history experiences changes and continuities over time. They all do. Every last one of them. Okay. There's even Baptists. Okay. Like if you go back to the earliest Anabaptists, okay, Gavin's church today, if you walked in there to worship, is not going to be anything like what the Anabaptist churches were like, right? There's some similarities, right? And those are called continuities, but there's a lot of changes, okay? And that is just, and I don't fault them for that because that's natural. It's natural for an identifiable historical community to go through changes and to maintain a certain level of continuity over time. Otherwise, what are we talking about? There's a reason why scholars, when they're talking about the Roman Empire, right? If you're a scholar of the Roman Empire, that means you study the Republic, but you also study the Empire. And then you kind of fall off once it gets into like the Byzantine era, right? Or the fall of Rome, right? And the birth of Europe. That's where you kind of fall off because you're like, this is kind of a different thing now. Right. But there was a massive change from the Republic to the Empire, and yet we still call it the Roman Empire. You're studying the same historical community, right, that has experienced a bunch of changes, but it's so continuous with itself that you can also still say, I'm studying the Roman Empire, whether it's the Republic era or the Empire era. Okay. Now, this is the thing. What Gavin does is he seizes in Catholic history, he'll seize on a moment of change, and he'll say, aha, you changed. Now, because you changed and we've changed, we're on the same playing field. So now we can put that kind of argumentation aside, and now we can just do the proof text thing that I'm more comfortable with doing, right? So what you have to do is you have to put it back on him, because he'll always say, just throw some Newman on it, right? Just throw like development of doctrine. It's like, well, yes, because doctrine does develop. St. Paul tells us that doctrine develops. He said, I laid a foundation like a wise master builder, but another is building upon it. This was always going to happen. Now, this is the funny thing. Gavin will not allow the church to go through doctrinal development or cultic development, okay? But he does allow it for the Old Testament. So when he looks at the Old Testament, you can't deny that this historically identifiable community throughout the Old Covenant history started as a clan of disparate Hebraic peoples that were Yahwists who really saw God as kind of like the high God, right? And then there were these other gods. Some people say henotheistic, right? But then they keep going, right? And they keep developing. There shall be no king in Israel. Next thing you know, there's a king in Israel, right? And then God's like, this is my chosen dude, right? And actually there's going to be a Messiah one day that's of his line, and that'll be like the true king of Israel. You're like,
forever.
So we went with there shall be no kings to like, there is a king, and I'm going to save the world through that king, right? The temple, the temple changes, right? From what we just talked about, from the first to the second temple, there's all these changes, but yet there's a level of continuity that you can trace right through and say, yes, this is still the same covenant community. And with his theology, he has to say that. He has to identify those three separate stages of Israel's history, of Yahwist history, right? Of Hebrew, Israelite, Jew. He has to see a continuity there in order to hold even the Old Testament together. Okay. But all of a sudden, right when it gets to the New Testament, bam, he no longer allows any of that anymore. And now it's like, literally, we have to do only what we see like in the pages of scripture, right? And by the way, even what he's seeing in the pages of scripture is totally misapplied, misinterpreted, because there's no context to fill it, right? But let's just take, for instance, that he's pretty right about what the early church might have looked like or something. The assumption that was never supposed to develop over time and grow into something much better and bigger and greater right? And more robust with a cult of its own, right? With a hierarchy and all these things. Like, that's preposterous because he allows that for the Old Testament. So all I'm asking him to do, right, is to take the same generosity that he gives to the Old Covenant community and give it to the New Covenant community of which he claims to be a part. Fair. And then here's the other thing. So now when you're talking about icon veneration, this is what I would say. Another thing you have to do with Gavin is when he seizes on a moment of change and he says, aha, like this isn't development. This is a complete U-turn. Let's press in there. Like, let's really get in there and see how much of a U-turn it actually is. Because what you do in this instance is you take the doctrine that has developed, or even the cultic practice that has developed, and what you do is you break it down into its constituent parts. It's like, where did that come from? How did that, even the Trinity, you could do the same thing. Once you get to the Nicene Constantinopolitan doctrine of the Trinity, much less the Chalcedon Christology, right? Once you get there, historians like to go back and find the constituent parts. How did they get to that point, right? And it's perfectly natural to do that. Well, it's the same with icon veneration. What are the constituent parts? I'll tell you what they are, okay? Number one, from the earliest time that we have a Christian archaeology at all, there are painted images on the wall. So that's number one. They're image painters. The launch pad for Christianity is not aniconism, okay? And we have Jewish synagogues also to show that aniconism is not the launch pad, all right? So even in the Mishnah, like you can read where the rabbis are like, no, 2D images are perfectly fine, right? So images is not a problem. So we know that the earliest Christians, even when they had no resources to hire good artisans and to come up with motifs of their own, they did everything that they possibly could to get art on those walls. So they're image painters. The second thing that all early Christians are, martyr venerators. 100%. As early as the martyrdom of Ignatius and as early as the martyrdom of Polycarp. You don't get earlier than Ignatius and Polycarp. These are companions of these are hearers of the apostles themselves. All right. And in Polycarp's martyrdom, the Romans are like, we better like really demolish these bones because we know what the Christians are going to do with them. Right? Because the Christians were accustomed to venerating the bones of their martyrs. Because Jesus said, whoever confesses my name on earth, I will confess his name before my Father in heaven. That means that Polycarp's name was being spoken by Christ in front of God. Right? So the Christians saw the martyrs in this very special place. That's why the Revelation of John puts the martyrs literally underneath the altar, pleading for us, like to God. How long, O Lord? How long? How long? Right? So you have this intercessory prayer thing going on. We have all these early inscriptions of people saying, Peter, pray for us, right? At 3rd century inscriptions. Some say the late 2nd century. Okay, so we know that they're image painters. We know that they're martyr venerators, okay? The third constituent part, they're kissers. And this did not escape Romans and Jews. This was weird that Christians kissed each other when they weren't married, or they weren't like brother and sister. They were perfect strangers, and yet they would greet each other with a kiss. And lest anyone should say that, they're just greeting each other. Like, who cares, right? No, that's not the case. Look in the apostolic constitutions, look in the Didascalia Apostolorum. There's actually regulations for who Christians can give the holy kiss to and who they can't. There's regulations for who the catechumens can kiss, because they say, look, your kiss is not yet holy. The holy kiss was a very specific thing. It was not just a greeting. It was an exchange of spiritual grace and power from one to the other, okay? Wow. So Christians would continue to kiss their dead. Like, they would continue to kiss their tombs. They would continue to kiss the bones. We have all these references of this, by the way, like all the way back to Egeria, to, her diary, to Jerome, even earlier, right? And each one of those 4th century authors are saying this is long-standing practice. St. Augustine, right, a favorite of the Protestants, talks about kissing the martyr's bones all the time. So you have image makers, martyr venerators, and holy kissers, okay? Now, there's one fourth constituent part that I'll put to that, and let's make it 3.5, okay? Because this is something that I think still needs to be studied a little bit more. But it's very clear that when you're reading Minucius Felix, his Octavius, it's interesting because the pagan is accusing him of being a cross worshiper. And you would think, right, if they just had this purely noetic view of God and this noetic view of religion, there's no materiality in the practice of their religion, that they'd be like, absolutely not. We're not cross worshipers, because God doesn't have an image. We don't worship any image. We worship the one who is invisible, right? You'd think that that's where he would go with it. He doesn't. You know what his response is? So do you. he starts pointing to the Roman trophies, the tropeons, because the trophies were in a cruciform shape. In fact, if you want, bring up the Alexamenos graffiti real quick. Okay, so keep that on for a second, because I'm going to talk about this for a second. So, okay, he's accused of being a cross worshiper. He's saying the Christians are these cross worshipers. Okay, and his response is that, but you venerate crosses. Look at the sails of ships, right? Look at the human body itself, that God even designed it to be cruciform. And then he says, your trophies, the battle standards and the trophies after you've won a battle, right? These were sacred objects that were set up, and they were set up in a cruciform shape, right? With like the battle armor and the helmet and all this stuff. And Romans would venerate them by doing this, once again, putting their arm up, okay? And venerating those trophies. So that means that the Romans, right, must have seen the Christians doing something to crosses in a public space, not in the private, because the Romans weren't able to come into their private gatherings. But the outer Roman world was seeing Christians do something with crosses that was pretty weird, to the point where they say, you guys worship crosses. So when you have the first depiction of crucifixion, the Alexamenos graffito, which is on screen now, this is a Roman making fun of a Christian man named Alexamenos, and it says Alexamenos worships God, right? And what's funny about this is that this exact motif can be found on Roman coins showing the veneration of a trophy. So what this Roman guy was doing was portraying like him worshiping their trophy, which is a crucified ass. so that's what the joke was, right? Is that like, you're worshiping something that should not even be considered a trophy, right? Because a trophy is where you actually win a battle. Okay. So, and then once you get into the early 4th century, we already have references to Christians who are kissing crosses. Okay. Not only the cross in Jerusalem, but liturgical crosses. And by the way, one more thing. This is also through this whole era, there is not one archaeological instance of a cross being painted by Christians. So where is this Roman pagan getting the idea that Christians are cross worshipers? And I think that Christians were in the custom of having little liturgical crosses. And I think they would kiss them, because that's the only way that this Roman accusation would be brought to Christians in the first place. Because how would they know if Christians were worshiping the cross in their minds or something, right? That doesn't hit. That doesn't land.
No,
they're clearly accusing the Christians of doing something public, civic, something you can see, and say you guys are cross worshipers, right?
Wow, that's a lot.
Sorry. So those are 4 constituent parts. Sorry, we got just to wrap this up and bring it home. So those are the 4 constituent parts: image makers, right? They're holy kissers. They're martyr venerators, and very likely they venerate crosses, which I also think is why still today this tradition is enshrined in Ethiopia and the Coptic tradition, where monks hold liturgical crosses still when they pray. I think that's actually a preservation of a very ancient practice of having little liturgical crosses. Okay, so you bring all that together, and now you ask the question: can we give the holy kiss that we give to tombs, to martyrs' bones, to the bishop's hand, to his ring, to the chalice, all these references that we have in the ancient fathers of venerating things, right? Holy things, and say, can we also offer that veneration and those outward gestures of honor to images of Christ and of Mary and of the saints? And the answer was, yeah. In fact, it wasn't that controversial until it was. Because the innovators were really the ones who were going around and trying to plaster over icons in churches, because nobody, all the way down into the early third century, probably late second century catacombs where there's images of Christ all over the place. They weren't plastering over those. The early Christians weren't plastering over those images, were they? Right. So the innovators are the iconoclasts, because they're coming in and they're saying, you can't have any of this stuff. And they're plastering over it. You're like, what are you talking about? We've always had it. We've always been image painters. Right. So the real question at Nicaea was not, hey, I feel like we should start worshiping icons, even though we don't, venerate anything. It's like, no, can we admit image to the existing cult of veneration that we've always had? Yeah. Now the question goes back to Gavin and say, now, Gavin, you don't have icon veneration. Okay. But here's the funny thing. You don't even have the 4 constituent parts that all Christians have practiced since the very earliest times of Christianity. You guys don't paint any images. You don't kiss martyrs' bones. You don't venerate the martyrs, right? You don't even practice the holy kiss. We still do. You don't practice the holy kiss. And you don't venerate crosses. But all Christians did that. So you're missing even the constituent parts, but you're going to come and show us how we're wrong?
Yeah.
So the Alexamenos graffiti, right? You see the form, you see the composition. Okay. This is the Roman coin I was talking about, right? And this is by the way, this is not like just one Roman coin among other. This is a ubiquitous like image. It's a motif of the Roman trophy. You can see how it's cruciform, right? Hand raised. In this case, they're putting a laurel on it. Okay, but you can see very clearly what this Roman soldier was doing when he created this image.
It's good.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
And again, if let's say it's 2nd century, say it is. What we just read, I don't care who it came from. At the end of the day, this idea of like, well, when did veneration begin? Where did this idea begin? The quote is, had support for the church fathers of 4th, 5th centuries and went back through them to the apostles themselves. Let's say it's 2nd century. Let's say it's early 2nd century. This concept isn't that far-fetched with what you just said, with what you just showed. Especially, I mean, Paul even commands to greet one another with holy kisses. I mean, you see this concept. If there is mockery in the 2nd century of what Christians are doing, then this idea of like, how could that ever go back to the apostles? How could the 4 things, or 3.5 as you call them, those things that are given, how can that go back to the apostles? This is absurd. We don't see any of that. Well, actually, you do. You actually do see that. You see it. You see it in Gnostic texts. You see it in paintings. You see it I remember when I was actually, the first time I was struck by this was when Peter of Alexandria, Bishop of Alexandria, was going to be executed. I was reading his story. This is while I was still an evangelical. And I thought it was weird that before his execution, he asked the guards to take him to the tomb of St. Mark, who was the first bishop in Alexandria, who was sent by Peter. He goes to the relics of Mark and he starts talking, praying, and asking intercession of Mark and asking for worthiness, that like, did I live up to your standard, Mark? Did I follow in your footsteps? I'm going to die like you died, but I want to make sure I did it right. I mean, I'm like, what? This is absurd. What kind of story is this? All pre-Nicaea II, by the way. And why is he going to relics? Why is he talking to relics? Why is he putting his hands on the tomb, kissing the tomb? What's going on here? Like, this is weird. But it was normal.
Yep.
This
totally normal.
was normal. And so to say that like, oh, well, this is, we're debating whether this is early 8th, late 8th, or even if you want to put it in 5th and 4th, we've got tons of examples of this long before that even started.
Yeah. And there's a couple of things I want to hit as well, because this is, I think, one of the perceived strengths in Gavin's argument. When he, to his credit, he is in the scholarship at this point. He's using Robin Jensen's book From Idols to Icons, and in her book, she talks about how like the rise of portraiture in Christianity isn't until later. Okay, like, so the early Christian images that they would paint were very narrative, and so it leads a lot of scholars to think that these were merely didactic. You know, it was merely you look up and say, oh, that's the biblical story of this. Maybe it was like even material for someone to preach on it or something. Yeah. Right, exactly. And it probably was. Okay. However, they'll point to the style of the art itself, right? As a proof of like, this is more didactic because you don't see just like a face first, like portrait of Christ, right? Or of a saint or something. The problem with that is that the Romans, so the style of the catacomb art, it actually is an identified style in art history. It's called the Second Pompeian style, which is the style that Romans would have in their larariums, in their homes. So it's the exact style of painting that the Romans themselves would venerate. Okay, so let me actually I'll pull up an example of what I'm talking about so that it's not just so you see this is a lararium in a house. Okay, and you see the style of the painting. Okay, so just keep that style in your mind and let me show you the catacomb painting. Right, so this is the Second Pompeian style. So in other words, this is a type of art that was common to pay an outward gesture of honor towards. It's not something that is just like merely narrative or didactic. So like this is what a lararium would have looked like in a Roman house, right? So they would also have their little idols and stuff and like, you know, burning their candles. But all of that just to say that like the style of the art actually speaks more to the idea that it's I wouldn't say likely. I'm just saying that it is not impossible that an ancient Roman Christian would have seen it as perfectly natural to pay a gesture of honor towards this type of art, right? They didn't just need portraits, right? Portraits develop later, even in pagan Roman art. Okay, so like the Second Pompeian art is the art that is pretty characteristic of the era for artisans. So Christians are using the art of their era to get anything up that they can up on those walls, in other words, until they can develop their own motifs and forms, right?
Yeah. I think that's a good point too, because again, we have examples, and a lot of times they're counter-Christian examples, like pagans or something. But what that's doing is it's showing you what was the societal norm for people in this area. Then we start seeing Christians do something similar to it. Obviously, their worship and their ideas are very different, but they're not doing something that was just like, wow, that's so innovative. I've never seen anything like that before in my life. Where did they get this from? Did they just wake up one day and start doing this? Like that's not the way this went. And that's the part that bothers me about this. It's like somebody woke up one day in Gavin's world and they just decided, let's paint a picture of the Apostle Paul up here and let's kiss it. I mean, like there's so much that goes into this that the Nicene Fathers in Nicaea II, they're talking over Protestants' heads, man. I mean, it's going in one ear and it's going out the other. It's going over their head. It's knocking their toupees off. I mean, it's so far out of their categories that for them to try to tackle these categories and tell us that we're wrong, that the Orthodox are wrong, it's a little bit absurd. Yeah. It's like us coming after Charles Spurgeon or something. I mean, these aren't your people. I don't know. I mean, and that's something I had to accept. It's something that I had to finally accept as a problem. Those people at Nicaea, they're not my people. I don't understand these people. Those people, I like the things that I like about it. And this is why Anglicans are like, well, some of them are like, we accept seven ecumenical councils, and the Protestants are, well, we only accept the spirit and the doctrines of 4. Well, why are they rejecting the other 3? What made the other 3 less ecumenical than the first 4? I never understood that as an Anglican when I was on the Protestants. Like, wait, we're just going to ignore these 3 over here because we don't like what they got to say over here, as if they were under different standards than the other 4 over here. But what is that doing? That's saying that we pick and choose what we like. Yeah. We don't understand fundamentally what these councils were doing, who they are, how they're connected. And so I think that's the problem. I think that truly is the problem, is that these aren't their people.
Yeah,
And
it's
they're
not their
trying to kill us.
fathers.
Yeah,
They call them the
they're
church fathers, but it's not their fathers. They don't read the church fathers and hope to learn, like, and to drink in from them their faith. Like, when I read the church fathers, I don't see anything that bothers me. There's nothing that bothers me. Like, whenever they're talking about kissing martyrs, and I don't even kiss martyrs' bones today. Like, so they're even further than we are. Like, I mean, I don't know any Catholics who are grabbing martyrs' bones and kissing them. I mean, you know, we'll kiss like their tomb or whatever we can get access to. But I mean, the ancient Christians were like taking the dust of martyrs and just sprinkling it on their eyes, like is what Jerome talks about. So it's like they're on a whole other level. I mean, they're even more like than we are today, right? So it's like, but there's nothing that I'm reading in the early fathers that would make me like pinch, right? Or feel like, ooh, or like, ooh, like I'll take that, but I won't take that. It's like, no, yeah, these are our fathers. I can drink in all of the water, right? That they're spraying. Like, but the Protestant feels uncomfortable reading the fathers. And if they claim that they're not, like, they've got to be lying. Like, you have to feel uncomfortable, because this is the other thing, is that like Protestants are iconoclastic, right? They're not even just iconic, like they're pretty iconoclastic. They have little exceptions for themselves, like when they like make movies, for instance, right? Or when they have like, you know, those like really cheesy pictures of like Jesus coming out of the tomb with blonde hair, or like when they have the like little picture Bibles, right? So they make little, you know, exceptions for themselves when it comes to this kind of stuff, but overall they have an iconoclastic heart. Okay. And so it's hard for them to enter into, and I mean this like sincerely, like I have compassion on them for this, because they've been discipled into iconoclasm. So when they walk into a Catholic church or an Orthodox church, it's hard for them to like get up with what's going on, because it's such a big jump for them to go from where they are right now to where everyone in the ancient world was, right? And more so. Okay. But what they don't appreciate, I think this would be helpful to them. Think less about how far you have to go to get from where you are today in iconoclasm to icon veneration or something, right? And think more about what it took for an entire pagan, idolatrous, idol-worshiping social order to go up from idolatry to mere icon veneration. Because that's what the Christians were doing. They were taking what they're doing here and they're saying, no. Down here, you can only venerate. You cannot worship these things, right? So the Protestant is at the way other end of the spectrum, like totally removed from the context. So that's why when the Christians are having these debates about icon veneration, you have to understand that, like, dude, we literally destroyed the entire pagan social order. We literally collapsed it all. We took the idols. Icon veneration is the very thing that took the idols down, right? And so it's weird. It's weird when Protestants look at icon veneration or our cultural praxis, right, in the church and say idolatry. And because I want to look at them and be like, this is the stuff that destroyed idolatry. Literally.
Wow. Man, put that in a book somewhere, would you? That's well said, because it's true. Because it made the distinguishing differences. It laid down the definitive lines and drew that line historically. Mm-hmm. And honestly, a lot of that stuff started disappearing. Like you said, it destroyed idolatry by the end of the debate. Mm-hmm. And so these are good things. And, you know, and I'm going to put the link to Gavin's video in the description as well. We didn't get into a lot. We only showed a clip here. Again, everything that we said is in the clip, and everything we've been addressing is in his first video and second video. I'm going to have both of those for you available. If you want to fact check us, that's fine. The link's in the description. Click either one. Video one he did, I think, 3 years ago, and then he did this one that I just showed a clip of last year, I believe it was. Check them both out. Read the transcripts. And I want you to do something, because this was... Steven and I just kind of talked about how to do this, and then we really just threw this together as far as which way are we going. Like, we didn't talk to each other about what we're sharing,
right? Yeah.
But I'm glad we went the way we went, because what we've done is we've challenged people to listen to us first on this, and then go back. Maybe you've already listened to the Gavin videos. Go back and listen to them again after listening to this, and start filtering what he says through this. I'm telling you, folks, those of you who are listening, you're going to have to spend a little bit of time just thinking and writing and meditating and processing, and then start all over again. as a person who was just disgusted by the idea of veneration a few years ago, has had to come a long way. And it didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen in one video I watched. It didn't happen in one book I read. It didn't happen in one podcast I listened to. It didn't happen in one experience visiting a Catholic church or Anglo-Catholic church. It took time, and it took detoxing thoughts that are just not fair history or proper understanding, or ignoring certain passages of scripture that I didn't even recognize. Take everything from the Old Testament passages that we talked about to first and second temple Judaism, looking at the progression, looking at these ideas of accretions, if you would. Look at these concepts that we see even in the Old Testament to the New Covenant people of God. Look at these pictures, these images, the idea of kissing, the relics, all of this stuff that we have talked about, creating a foundational framework for history. That's where Gavin's history of icons goes wrong, because that's the name of this episode. That's where it goes wrong. It doesn't lay the foundation for everything that leads to Nicaea II. Just getting upset that there's a bunch of anathema, how dare we? You can't start with that, because you got to know what you're being accursed for. Like, what they're putting curses out there for has to be established before we just get offended that, well, I don't do that, so therefore I'm doomed. Well, I guess I just hate Nicaea too. And they, that's where a lot of Protestants start swinging their fists at Nicaea too. They're under the accursed clause because they don't venerate. And therefore they're already giving themselves, well, these people at Nicaea too think I'm going to hell because I don't do what they say. But you don't even know what they're saying yet. Like, you started at the end of the argument and never actually got to hear the argument. So I would challenge you to go through this video, even if you've listened to Gavin on any of those 2 episodes. Go back and listen to him after you've listened to this, and I think you're going to start seeing some red lights flash. You're going to go,
yeah,
and that was addressed by Steven and Steven.
And they need to, I think Protestants need to understand what they're actually going to, what did you go out there to see, right? When they go to a Catholic church or an Orthodox church, they have to, they can't see it the same way that they do when they go to visit other Protestant churches or like church hop or any of this stuff. I'm just going to see what these people are up to, right? No. You have to see it. You are going to another land. You're going to a different country. You're going to Narnia, man. Like, it is that different. It is that different from the mansion, the English mansion that you're in, right? Like, it is that different. Because the ancient world has been preserved in the Christian cult. Right. And it has repudiated the demonic elements of that cult and has maintained everything that was covenantal, right, about that cult, everything that was temple, right, about that cult, because Jesus didn't repudiate the temple qua temple. He replaced the Herodian temple with the true one. So when you're walking into a Catholic church, you're not just walking into one church among many. You're walking into a totally different country. And so you should feel weird, just the same way you would if you were plopped down in the middle of India. You should be like, whoa, I don't know what's going on here, right? That's okay. You can feel like a foreigner because you are. And this is why the ancient fathers were very meticulous about this issue, because they knew that everything hangs on the cult, right? Everything hangs on how we worship. Because the minute that you change the way you worship is the minute that those texts of the New Testament are no longer going to speak to us the same way that those texts spoke to the early Christians. Wow. The Mass is literally your encounter with Jesus. And what it's doing is it's recreating the same experience that the apostles had when they encountered Jesus Christ. And then they recognized him in the breaking of the bread and the prayers. That's when they recognized him. When you walk into a Catholic Mass, you are being given the apostolic experience of being in Christ's presence. And it is uncomfortable if you're not accustomed to it.
Yes.
Right? Like, you're not going to be immediately accustomed to it. That is okay. You should feel weird, like when you walk in. But this is the thing. You say, like, oh, anathema to those who do not have the images and all these things. It's like, whoa, hold on a second, though. Are they wrong? Are they wrong? Because every Christian heresy begins with iconoclasm. Every Christian heresy begins with either tearing down Jesus's real humanity, right? Tearing down like the goodness of material itself, right? Look at the iconoclasts, what they did. The next thing that they did after they plastered over images, they started to actually dig up the martyrs' bones and burn them. Okay. And then what happened in England? Jolly old England, right? What happened? First thing, actually, before England, in Germany, what was the first thing that happened with Karlstadt? Break the images, break the images, break the images. What happened in England? Yeah. Tear down the images, plaster over them, right? And what ends up happening? The doctrine follows. And you get these novel interpretations of Scripture, because Scripture belongs in the household of God. Like, you will only be able to truly understand the Scriptures when they are in this ancient context that our cultus has preserved through the centuries. That's why we have so much continuity, and we only have changes that were deemed necessary at the time to keep the church moving, like, because the church is a living body, and living bodies do change over time, but they remain continuous as well. We have the same gospel that the early fathers had. We have the same scriptural canon. We have the creeds. We have the councils. We have the sacraments, and we have the same beliefs about all of those things that the early fathers had, and you don't, right? And that's not to be like mean. It's to shake you, to give you a wake-up call, to realize that, like, you can't come to Catholics like Gavin does and start accusing us of changing the faith and all these things, when it is very well documented that pretty much everything we believe about all those things I just mentioned are what the fathers believed, and it's not what you believe. When it comes to the gospel, do Baptists have the same gospel as the early fathers? This is why they're always uncomfortable when they go back and read an early father and like, where's the gospel? You want to know why? Because they're waiting for someone to say, you're saved by faith alone, through grace alone, right? Because to them, that's the gospel. But to the fathers, the gospel was the creed, right? And just recently, the Baptists were uncomfortable with the Nicene Creed. They started talking about, there's certain things in the Nicene Creed that, like, we're not comfortable with, I'm not sure about, right?
Baptism for the forgiveness of sins. Oh, no.
Right. So it's like, they're not comfortable with the creed. They don't accept any of the councils like the whole church has, like all these centuries, right? They don't have the episcopate or apostolic succession, which all of the early Christians believed. Okay. So again, you've removed yourself from this superstructure of continuity, and then you took the book with you. And now you're going off and interpreting the book in this like modern iconoclastic society. And that's why you don't understand the text. There's a veil over your face as you read the text of the apostles. And I hope that what this episode does, honestly, is just, in all the disparate ways that we talked about this, I just hope that the real point is that veil starts to be removed a little bit, so that you see those texts for what they really are, because they belong here in the context of the celebration of the liturgy.
Man, that is so good. I can't help but think about what you said earlier, too. What of King Henry VIII's first moves when he became angry with Rome is he desecrated Augustine of Canterbury's tomb. He destroyed relics. I mean, this is what happened. The Huguenots destroyed Irenaeus of Lyon's relics. I mean, these things.
That's demonic, because the demons hate that stuff, because that's what replaced them.
Yeah, and it's scary it's so scary to think about. And by the way, most of you who are listening that are Catholic or Orthodox, I know I have a good group of followers now from those two crowds. Most of you probably don't know this, that every Sunday when you go to Mass, or any Mass you go to, most of the time you're in the presence of relics and you don't even know it. Every altar, thanks to Nicaea II, by the way, has relics under the altar. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that. You talked about the catacombs earlier. They were doing masses over tombs of martyrs, and then we also see the souls under the altar, the book of Revelation, and these visions and so forth. But you're in the presence of relics, whether you know it or not. On Sundays, when we go to Mass, or if I have to go during the week or something like that at Prince of Peace Catholic, the relics of St. Linus, Peter's immediate successor, is under the altar. There's actually relics hanging on the walls of medieval people, right there on the wall. You would never know it, just walking by, and all of a sudden you turn, and there's like a little story about this. I mean, little granulars of bone just hanging on the wall. It's like, well, that's interesting. I mean, there's some guy's bones hanging up on the wall. And I remember seeing that at first, like you said, there was a level of like, this is a little uncomfortable. And on the website of the church, I mean, it's high altar. Here's the relics under the high altar. It's like, wait, we're celebrating 14 names of relics under the altar here. And now I can't imagine being at a mass without it.
Yeah. And there's nothing more Christian than that. Like, there is truly nothing more Christian than that, because the Romans did not treat their dead that way. The Romans, necropolises were always built outside of the city, beyond the sacred pomerium, beyond the city, the sacred city boundary. The dead were always kept outside. Even for the Jews, like, they were kept outside. The dead were put outside in the Kidron Valley in Jerusalem, not by the temple. It was outside of the walls. Okay. Christians were the only ones who built their churches on top of the dead. Like, we were the first. That's what, even the word cemetery, right? That, like, Romans didn't have cemeteries. They had a necropolis. They call it cemeteries because it comes from the Latin word for sleeping, because Christians believe that the dead were merely asleep, right? And so Christians were the only ones who would touch bones. Like, dude, if you were a Jew and you touched the dead body, right, of someone, you were unclean. You had to ritually wash, right? But the Christian view is that if you touched it, you were blessed, because these were holy people. They were touched by God, and uncleanness is always warded off by what is holy. So Christians were not defiled when they touched the dead, the holy dead, right? They were actually blessed by it. And that's why churches have always been built over the tombs of the martyrs. The first Christian churches were built in the Roman necropolises. St. Peter's Basilica is right over the necropolis. If you keep walking down, and Romans didn't understand this. They're like, why aren't you keeping a sacred boundary between yourself and the dead? Because Christians had this totally different view of what the dead actually was. So that's why when Protestants see us like have all these bones and stuff, they're like, you guys are pagan weirdos, right? And you're like, dude, that is the most Christian thing in the world, and the entire ancient world recognized that we were weird.
Wow, man, this is so good. This is so good. Folks, I hope you, again, take your time in this, go back, listen to sections, take notes, write this down. We're so glad that you joined us for this episode. Steven, thank you for coming out. There will be a link in the description for your channel. I want everybody that follows this channel that does not follow the Catholic Brothers to stop now at this point, because there's nothing of value we're saying after this, to stop now and go ahead and subscribe to their channel. They do tremendous work. These guys are deep thinkers, underrated deep thinkers, and we need their content to distribute further. And so go out there and click that link and subscribe to their channel. We'll wait for you to do that. Also, if you're listening for the first time on this channel, we're so glad that you joined us on this episode of Facts. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe in here. And Lord willing, we just released a lot of new stuff. There's also a Discord group now for a lot of you guys that are in the members and that are giving on the second link in the description. Thanks for those that have done that recently. We had a bunch of people just join the last couple of weeks. Some of you are emailing me asking for the Discord. Go to the membership side of the page. It's right there. Just click it and we'll let you in. Maybe. We had a Baptist join the other day, so y'all are fine. Like, don't worry. Like, come as you are, right? We'll fix you. But we had a Baptist come in the other day, and he's been putting all these Baptist jokes in memes in the Discord page. So we just opened that up for everybody. Caleb at Prince of Peace, he is moderating all that. He's taking care of you guys that are in there. So make sure you hit the membership. It'll automatically take you to the page where you can get an opportunity to join. Or if you want to give outside, go to the link in the description and you'll get an email, and that'll have that available link there as well. Steven, thank you so much for joining, keeping us this long time. But look, there's so much good that's done here, and I think we'll get a good response here. Thanks for joining.
Thanks a lot for having me, man. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Last time. No. We'll keep it going, man. I love having you on. I'm wondering what I'm going to be converted to next. Last time we talked, I was converted from Anglican to Catholic. What's left? Anyway, no, it's good to have you on, Steven. I'll see you backstage. All right, folks. So good for you to join us. As I said, make sure you hit the like and subscribe on this video. If you're listening on the podcast side of this, make sure you hit the follow. Leave us a 5-star on your favorite platform. We're on 8 total platforms, 9 with YouTube. Thank you for those that have been joining on those other platforms as well. This was a longer episode, but I thought it was really, really important that we spend time in here and then get into some of these discussions, look at these different contexts. I think it'll go a long, long way. As always, folks, grace and peace to you. God bless.